G'day guys, welcome back to another episode of Red Time, an ESPN footy podcast. Jared Barker away today, but you've got me, Alex Hatzikostas, and to my right, a man who needs no introduction, the main event, Jake Michaels. How are you, mate?
I'm very good, and we are in extremely good hands with you alongside me today.
Oh, too kind.
Shout out to Jared, though, who is sick, and I didn't want him to get me sick. I'm off next week for a few weeks of leave. So
heading back to Japan.
I'll be there briefly. But I didn't want him to get me sick because for him to not come into work, he's got to be pretty unwell, that man.
He does. That man works like no one else you've ever seen. So we wish you all the best, Jared. A speedy recovery, but footy waits for no man. And again, another massive week of footy ahead of us, and we may as well kick into it. So, Jake, I'll ask you first up, should Dustin Martin be playing his 300th game this week?
Well, obviously there's that little, well, I guess it's a big caveat of his health. Is he sick? Is he not sick? I'm reading between the lines a little bit with that, especially because on the AFL side, in the injury list, he isn't listed as illness. He's listed as being managed this week. So if the Tigers were alive for a final spot, or if they were, 7 or 8 rungs higher on the ladder, would he be playing this week? I think he would. So in that way, probably he should be playing. But I think, look, I'm okay with them holding him off for next week. They're going to be playing Hawthorn at the MCG on a Saturday afternoon. I think it's going to be a big crowd. Yeah. What do they get? Do you think 80,000 they get for that game?
Something like that for the traditional line in the sand game. And no, that's Hawthorn. What am I talking about? I'm losing my mind. But the lights are getting to me. But no, you are right. They do tend to get
I think they'll
80,
get 80. I think they
odd.
should. You'd hope they get 80 for that game for Dustin Martin, one of the greatest players ever for the club. And I don't want this to sound ridiculous, and I don't mean it to, but there is a chance. I'm not saying a 50-50. I'm not even saying it's a 30% chance. There's a chance, it's on the board, that next week, his 300th against the Hawks will be his last.
His last?
I think it's on the board. I think it's a chance. As I said, I don't think it's the likely scenario, but I think it's possible. It's going to be a game at the MCG where he's played his best footy and been one of the greatest performers on that stage of all time. With his 3 Norm Smith medals. I guess one of them wasn't there, but still, he's got 2 of them there. It's pretty good.
The spiritual home of always Norm Smith medals.
100%. Trent Cotchin will be there. Jack Riewoldt will be there. All his former teammates will be there. And the other interesting part is the Suns are on a bye next week. So Damien Hardwick, I fully expect, will be there.
Will be in attendance.
In a similar way to we saw Alistair Clarkson travel up to the SCG for Buddy's 1,000th goal. So, I don't know. It just feels like a moment where it would be a good way to, not a good way, but it might be the right time to bow out. Now, I'm not saying, I don't have any intel, I don't have any, this is just
no
pure,
inside mail, just pure vibes.
Pure vibes. And I wouldn't be surprised with a player like Dusty. He's not the sort of person, as we know, who's going to make a grand announcement to have a farewell tour. It wouldn't be shocking, and I think it's on the board.
Okay, I'm going to disagree with you. I don't think, obviously, like you said, it's a very slim chance that might happen. I think it's more likely that he's going to finish up at the end of the year and just sort of walk off into the sunset. With no big, like you said, no big fanfare, no
move to Gold Coast.
No move to Gold Coast, no big parade, similar style to how Buddy went out with no grand final parade round the Oval on grand final day. But yeah, I believe he should, to answer the question at hand, I believe he should be playing. And to your point, that if it were a bigger game this week, or if the Tigers were in contention for a final spot, he 1,000% be playing. But I think it's a nice tactical management, as you said.
And as I said, just on Martin for next week, 300 games, champion of not just the Tigers, of the AFL. And
100%.
I obviously spoke about Nick Dacos a couple of days ago about how I think he's on track to be the greatest midfielder of all time. Well, Dusty might have that gong right now. He's in a select group of great midfielders that we've seen.
Absolute champions of the game.
And he needs to be celebrated. And whether game 300 is just 300 and he keeps going, or it is the last, we should be celebrating him, not just Richmond fans, but everybody.
100%. I'm in complete agreement with you there.
Moving on, which top 8 side at the moment has the most to prove going into this weekend?
Well, I think if we look at it, my answer is going to be the Giants. GWS, they started the year 5-0. Everyone was on their bandwagon, their premiership favourites. Jared Barker said at the start of the year that they were the most complete list out of the entire AFL.
It only took 5 minutes for JB.
Only took 5 minutes. JB, I'm throwing pot shots at you left, right, and centre. But and I agreed with him at that time. I thought they were a very complete outfit. But since starting 5-0, they've gone 2-4 out of their last 6, and they've lost to Carlton, they've lost to Sydney, they've lost to the Bombers and the Dogs. And not to say that they've been bad sides that they've lost to. If anything, it's a complete opposite. They've been really good sides. But it is that expectation from the start of the season where they were premiership favourites. If they were truly the calibre of side that are going to go on and make a big dent at the end of the year, they've got to be beating those sides. And
That's fair.
I think they've got a lot. They've got a lot to prove this week.
Well, I think the Giants, and they're not the only team, the Giants have had a lot of injuries. And I always say injuries aren't an excuse. People want to use and say, oh, it's just an excuse. They're a reason. You take 5 or 6 of the best players out of any team, it's going to be a little bit different.
Well, just look at the likes of Brisbane. Like, they've gutted half their side, and their performances aren't the same. But
yeah, so I think when they get players back, they will be okay. I do agree with Jared's evaluation of them at the start of the year. When you look at each line, they stack up as well as anybody across the field. I think the answer is Gold Coast, though. Now, Gold Coast is 8th. I think it's the obvious answer, but I think it's the right answer.
Right.
They're in unfamiliar territory being in the top 8. They haven't spent that many weeks of club existence
in the
top 8. They just don't. So there is pressure to stay there and to show that they deserve that spot that they have. They've shown great signs this year under Damien Hardwick, and I've been impressed with them. Going right back to opening round, that first half, I thought that maybe they have or will turn the page under Hardwick. But there's still one major issue, and it's that inability to win games on the road. We said this a week or maybe last week when we were talking on Tuesday with Christian about the home and away win-loss records. But it's quite crazy. They haven't won. Gold Coast has not won a game, an away game, since round 9 last year, over a year ago, and it was against West Coast in Perth. It wasn't the greatest
not a massive
scalp
of all time. Yeah. That's a fair point you raise. So it is something which they do. A lot of eyes will be on them.
Yeah. And so they've been outscored in that time in those away games. They've been outscored by 454 points, and they would have a percentage of those games of 65. So it's very ordinary. Now they have the Saints at Marvel Stadium this weekend. Now it's an opportunity. The Saints are a bottom 4 side. They're not going well. Now they're not North Melbourne, but if you want to be playing finals this year, as the Suns would hope to be doing, particularly where they find themselves halfway through the year, they must win this game. You cannot just have it. How long can this streak go?
Oh, 100%.
They need to find a way to win this game.
And it's Saturday night prime time?
It will be Saturday night, and it will be, I believe it is the only game on Saturday night, given the Thursday and Monday. So it is. It's a rare prime time slot for the Suns and St Kilda.
And St Kilda, for that fact. Yeah, all eyes on them. So, no, I do take your point. I do. I might be.
Have I swayed you?
Yeah, you might have swayed me. I've still got a lot of concern towards the Giants.
The Giants do, yeah.
Yeah, just probably that sort of perceived drop-off at least. But speaking of those in the top 8, let's reverse it. Which bottom 10 side are you most optimistic about for the rest of the season? So who's had maybe not the greatest start, but who you think, there's still a bit of something there?
Well, I didn't go. I've been a bit sort of cautious with both picks, but I went the team that was the lowest for the other one, and I'm going to go the team that's the highest for this one, Collingwood. They're 9th. They're around the mark. I think they're another team that's been decimated by injury. And when you look at some players that will come back, Mason Cox, Jordan De Goey, Jamie Elliott, Brody Myercheck, Scott Pendlebury, obviously Tom Mitchell. They've got a lot of serious players to come back into this side. They're not, as I said, they're 9th at the moment. I think they are more likely to win the premiership this year than at least 5, if not 6, of the teams that do occupy a spot in the top 8 right now.
Okay.
I think they have, as I said, when they get those players back, they're going to be a better team. They're still scoring 86 points per game despite having no forward line and 3 of their 4 best midfielders having missed serious time this year. And while they're not checking as many of those premiership standards as they probably would have liked, I think that does go back to the start of the year, that premiership hangover, which I think we can call now.
Yeah, definitely.
And of course the injuries. And as I said earlier, the injuries are a legitimate reason why a team performs a certain way. They're not an excuse; it's the reality. So yeah,
It's just an explanation.
I think so, and I think Collingwood, it would not surprise me in the slightest if they start. Well, they already have since their poor start to the year. They've been climbing up the ladder. Slip up last week, but yeah, I think they win King's birthday, and I think they continue climbing up the ladder.
Look, I tend to agree with you for this season, for who's going to have impact towards the pointy end of the year. But if we're lifting our eyes and looking, a bit further and beyond, I think I'm quite optimistic about West Coast. Now, maybe call me a Harley Reid bandwagon.
Not for this year, though.
No, not for this year. Not by any means. And
Nearly gave me a heart attack.
I'm not sure if there's even a mathematical possibility of them making finals. Maybe not yet. Don't fact check me. But
No,
if
they can. They could. They certainly could.
They certainly can. Well, let us know the math at Footy Tips on Twitter. But I am honestly really excited at how they've sort of started to perform over the last couple of weeks. And they've had a couple of wins, which I know doesn't sound like much, but for West Coast, considering where they've been, given that their lowest was low, it seems that they've somewhat started to find a bit more belief in the joint. And I think I'm quite optimistic that they will scrape together a couple more wins this season, and it starts to look a bit better. And then if they can continue that next year and the year after, then they're looking in a good spot. But I'm just quietly excited by the way which they're going. And I think Adam Simpson has done a decent job to at least keep the morale. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they go with Harley Reid out for the next couple, but suspended. But I think it'll be a nice watch to just see how they go for the rest of the season.
We had 3 players this week sign long-term deals and very long deals with their clubs. Each of them shunning free agency in the process. Do you think this is a trend we're going to start seeing more of in the AFL?
I do, and the reason why, and I'm sure I'm not alone in this thought, particularly with player contracts in recent years, but the contracts aren't worth the paper they're signed on. Like the players are using these deals. They're betting on themselves and providing themselves with shorter term value. Obviously, it provides them with security, but they're betting on themselves that if they continue to perform in the manner in which they earned these new contracts, they'll be looking abroad across clubland and just seeing where the offer is, where the value is. And I'm not saying that players don't value loyalty. I don't think loyalty in football is dead yet. I think loyalty in the AFL is significantly higher than what it is in a lot of other sports. Oh, 100%. I just think that these long-term deals, like they seem like a big rubber stamp of approval, but yeah. I'm just not fully convinced. Like until we see these players like McCluggage sign for 7, Rozee for 8, Norton 8, Taylor 7, Hayward this week was it 5?
5, yeah.
Until we start seeing these players work through these contracts, and multiple years down the track, I'm skeptical.
I think we will see more, and I think the reason for that is quite obvious. I think it's a win-win for the majority of players and clubs. So you think about it, you mentioned it, the player gets the long-term stability, they get financial security. I actually don't see it as betting on themselves, because I think betting on yourself is taking the short-term deal in the hope that, you take a 2-year deal, hope that by the end of that point when you're negotiating the next contract or looking to go elsewhere, you can get more.
That's a fair point.
They get that long-term stability, and as a result of that, they get it on a bit of a discount, so the club can save money on it. So we know that the contract today worth $600,000 or $1 million today, as we were talking about with Chad Warner a couple of weeks ago, that figure is not the same today as it would be in 2028, 2029, when we're getting into the back end of these deals. So the club is getting somewhat of a discount by locking them away long term. So I think it is a bit of a win-win. As I said, I think the short-term deal, there is still a place for it, as we are seeing, obviously. But the long-term deal for the gun player, even the above-average player, is going to be something I think we see more and more of.
No, fair enough. Let us know. Let us know your thoughts at Footy Tips on Twitter. Let Jake know. What's the handle at J Michaels ESPN on Twitter?
I think it is, yeah.
There we go. Let him know. Let's see whether Jake can get back to you or not. But speaking about locking people away, so did the Adelaide Crows make a mistake in extending Matthew Nix's contract at the start of 2023, given where they're at now?
Well, mistake is a very strong word, and I don't think the club would say that, certainly wouldn't say it publicly, but I don't think they would even think that themselves. I think mistake's a pretty strong way of putting it. If they had their time again, would they do things differently? Would they not have offered it? Maybe. Well, but look, we're not going to speculate on that. I think the facts are Adelaide were inches, millimetres. They should have been playing finals last year. They were so close. You can say they were robbed, whatever you want to say. They should have been there. They weren't, and they were so close. And I've got to say, I don't think they've been that bad this year, as bad as what everyone says. Like, you ask anyone, and the reaction will seem as though Adelaide's been one of the worst 3 or 4 sides this year. I really don't see it that way. Call me crazy. I quickly just go through their year. So they lost to the Gold Coast away from home by 6 points to start the season. No issue in that, particularly because Gold Coast had that first week they played opening round. Then they lost to the Cats by 19. We know Geelong went on to win, I think, 7 straight to start their season. So they were a form team.
They were doing okay.
Then they had their actual one of 2 poor games. That was a 35-point loss to Freo in Perth. Not their best performance. Only scored 34 points. Move on. They lost to Melbourne by 15. You know, Melbourne, we can talk about Melbourne a little bit more, but certainly then we all thought Melbourne was a good side. I think a lot of people still do. So that's the 0-4 start. The alarm bells were ringing, everyone was panicking. Then they go and beat Carlton by 2 points. They lose to Essendon by 3, a game they could have won. Then they beat North and Port back-to-back weeks, and then draw with Brisbane in a game they would look at and think they probably could have or should have won that.
If that game continued for another minute, they win that game.
Yeah. The following week, they lose to Collingwood by 4, same sort of story. Then they beat West Coast by 99 points, and then last week was that 27-point loss to Hawthorn, which is probably the second poor performance of the year. That's against the Hawthorn side at the MCG, which might be, the after Sydney, the most informed team in the league. So the record of 4 wins, 7 losses and a draw doesn't look great, but I don't think it's anywhere near as bad as what many might expect. In fact, only 7 teams in the league have a better percentage than Adelaide.
Jeez,
so, and that percentage is always a great indicator of how your whole year has looked in terms of. So, you know, you can't get carried away one week to the next. I don't think they're the 7th or 8th best team, but I certainly don't think they're a bottom 4 side or a bottom 5 side where they are at the moment. I think they are somewhere in the middle. Do they need changes? Yes, they do. They need extra pieces. They need more. They need to add more there. And the younger kids have shown some signs they were only going to improve. But I don't think it's anywhere near as disastrous as what some have made out. And I don't think Matthew Nix should be as close to or on the hot seat that many have sort of said he is.
I totally agree. I think, like you said at the start, I think maybe they possibly could have done it a bit differently. But also, if you look at their season last year, if you're not going to extend his contract then, like, when would you extend his contract? You'd get rid of them. And then the question's about, okay, well, who would you bring in?
And you need some consistency and stability. You cannot just cycle through coaches.
100%.
Moving on, who is under more pressure entering Sunday night? Carlton or Essendon? Huge game at the MCG.
A massive game, and you're not going to like me, Jay, because I think Carlton are under a lot more pressure than Essendon. Essendon are already way overs on what everyone expected.
Everyone keeps telling me that Essendon is in with a chance this year.
Yeah, well, they are. They've performed in a manner, yes, maybe via the premiership standards, they might not be checking everything, but look at where they are on the ladder. Look at the wins which they've gotten and the performances which they've had against some of those teams. And I think they're already proving way overs and way beyond expectations from what their own supporters, from what the wider AFL media landscape and fandom have thought.
Yep.
I think that if Carlton lose this week, it is more reflective on Carlton than it is on Essendon. And what I mean by that is that if Carlton win, then, okay, well, Carlton's a top 4 side, premiership contending side. They should win this game. But if they lose, alarm bells, what's going on? Like, they should be beating a side like Essendon, who, like I've said, no one expected Essendon to be in the position which they are now. So I think there's a lot of pressure on Carlton this week. I'm not sure your thoughts.
Look, I tend to agree with you, and I think you're right. If the Blues win, they don't get a huge amount of credit. If they lose, everyone will start to question their credentials, right or wrong. I don't think it's quite the same with the Bombers. The reason I've been hesitant, obviously, to
famously hesitant over on the Bombers for this year.
I have, and I think you look at their record this year, and everyone's getting carried away with how great they are. I think it's more the latter position than the record, because their record at this point last year was not that dissimilar. They were 8-5 after 13 games last year. They're 8-1-3 at the moment with that draw. So it's quite comparable and similar. That 8-5 last year became 11-12. So it all fell apart after the bye in the second half of the year. Now, I'm not suggesting that it will happen again. But why shouldn't we have any concern? We've seen a similar start for Essendon, and it fell apart. Their record, I just don't think we should look at the Bombers and be convinced that what we've seen in the first half of the year is what we're going to get in the second half in terms of win-loss record. I think they're going to get far tougher games. It's going to get harder for them. And I think we've already saw last week against Gold Coast a few little cracks starting to appear in certain areas. So I think the pressure is on Carlton, but I'm very interested to see how Essendon go. And if Essendon do lose 2 in a row, the first time they've lost 2 in a row this year, I just wonder if not that things will start unravelling, but if there will be a little bit of pressure on the Bombers to keep up. Otherwise, they will start a slide.
I guess, the thing which comes to mind is that, yes, they did have that calamitous slide at the back end of last year. They can only use that as a guide of what not to do. Like, they've had that experience, and so hopefully they've got things in place to be able to.
I'm happy to be proven wrong with the Bombers, but I certainly want my flowers when I'm proven right.
Okay, we'll give them to you. Like, you do like a big call, but you do back it up with the facts and with the data. But final question is, we've gone
flying
through this. So we spoke about Melbourne and Collingwood a little bit earlier in the podcast, but who would a win mean more to on King's birthday, Melbourne or Collingwood?
Well, I think they both would take the win, and it's quite interesting, these two sides. Did anyone at all in pre-season predict that both Melbourne and Collingwood would sit outside the top 8 heading into King's birthday halfway through the season?
I don't think anyone would, and if someone did, they're lying.
I certainly didn't. So, as I said, both will be looking for a win, both desperate for one. I think it's Melbourne, quite clearly. After last week was diabolical. That was one of the worst performances, not just under Simon Goodwin, not just in recent history, but in club history. And I know that sounds crazy, but given the expectation of Melbourne, given the expectation of their opponent, and everything, the way in which they lost that game, the smashing in contested possession, clearance inside 50, everything like that. Champion Data had never recorded a game like that in history for any club. So it was a shocking loss, and they need to come back this week. They've had a few extra days to stew on it as well, given the Monday game, and they need to come back out and make a statement early on. And this game does mean more to them. I think people are starting to question their credentials. I think Collingwood, as I said before, we've looked at Collingwood and said, we all think they're a good team. Injuries, as I've sort of said, I think a lot of people would agree that that's kind of been, when they get players back, those players I mentioned, they are going to be a significantly better side. Melbourne, we still have some concerns. We have some concerns about a couple of things, and I think there is pressure on them now, given last week and what will happen if they do lose this game. Sneaky pressure on Simon Goodwin, and pressure, I guess, on what was billed after their 2021 premiership success as the beginning of an era or a dynasty. It really was, and that's started to slip away. They haven't won a final since then, as I mentioned the other day.
Yeah, that stat blew my mind.
Yeah, they're 0-4 in finals since beating the Dogs in the grand final in 21. And you look at their list, and you know,
They're not the youngest.
five of their best 6 players are 28 plus. 3 of them, Gawn, May, Viney, 30 plus. You got Leven Petrarca at 28. We're talking about, there is some younger talent there, no doubt about it. But it's not as, you think these premiership windows stay open forever. They don't. They always shut. Everyone will tell you they shut far quicker than you can ever imagine. So this year, and it's not to say one game, if they lose, it's not to say that they can't come back and win. I'm not going to say that. But if for whatever reason this year slips away too, then it's another year older all these guys get. And then all of a sudden we think, if you go back to that 21 grand final year and they're walking around celebrating Optus Stadium it was, and if you said that this iteration of the Demons will not win another premiership, I think people would have really laughed at that.
Yeah, considering how good and progressive and
hard
and fast their football was.
They were dominant.
It was a dominant team.
They were dominant, and the list and age profile checked every box. So
100%.
Massive pressure on Melbourne this week to turn things around from what was just an abhorrent loss.
No, 100%. I agree with everything you've said there because, again, we can only talk about it so much, but a 92-point loss to the Dockers. It was abysmal, and they also lost to the Eagles by 35 points a couple of weeks back as well. And I'm not saying that they're going to lose to both of those sides again because they do play them again later this season. But even though their draw coming up isn't the most difficult, there are still some games which, the Demons may have a propensity to lose. And I think combined with all the off-field drama that we saw at the start of the season and the back end of last season, as well as the performances and the seemingly complete lack of forward line structure, which the Demons have at the moment, they are in, this may be a hot take, but they are in dire straits.
Yeah.
If they lose this game, they are in a real big pickle. And I think it's not even just sneaky pressure on Simon Goodwin. I think some serious questions will be asked of him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think, as I said, I don't think it's I mean, every game you want to win, but it's not a must win in terms of their season. But it does feel a bit like that because if they do lose, we always kind of assume that to win a premiership, you really do need to be top four. So it's very easy to say, well, they're only a game or two or whatever it will be outside the 8, depending on how things shake out. You don't want to be finishing 7th or 8th.
You don't really want to be
you want to be top 4, and the more games they continue to lose. And as you said, the draw isn't the trickiest. They don't have the trickiest draw over the next after the bye the next month. It's not too bad, but they would not want to be slipping any further behind them than what they already have.
Not at all. Oh, what a great episode that was, Jake.
Thank you for joining me.
We're fired through that. I will admit there were an early stumble, which I had an early stumble. I said Richmond Essendon was the line in the sand game.
So maybe it can be a line in the sand.
Maybe it can be. Maybe it can be to help them out. But that's all we have time for this week. Thank you, Jake, for joining as always. Hopefully, Jared Barker will be back in this chair next week or in the few of the weeks. Hopefully, he gets better soon. But in the meantime, happy watching of the footy, happy tipping, and we'll see you in the next episode.